Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jackie. I'm glad you're here. So today we're going to be discussing the nodes, the North Node and the South Node cycle that is changing next month. South Node is going into Leo, the North Node is going into Aquarius at 29 degrees. And this is the very beginning of an 18-month journey that's going to gradually unfold through every house of the chart, bringing super powerful lessons around specifically self-expression, authenticity, relationships with that Leo energy, purpose, healing, as well as just personal growth. So in today's video, we're looking specifically at how this nodal axis may manifest for each of the rising signs, along with the important influences of Jupiter, the Sun, Hygeia, Vulcan, Pluto, Juno, Eris, and Chiron. They're all going to be in the mix when the nodes change. And that is very important because that helps to establish the subtext or the sub-narrative of the rest of the transit. So more importantly, we're going to be exploring what these symbols might be revealing from a psychological perspective, what patterns might be surfacing, what lessons will likely be emerging, and where growth and healing may be asking for your attention right now. So check for your progressed rising, your regular rising, your progressed rising, if you know it, your sun and your moon as well for the most well-rounded understanding. Now, as always, guys, remember that astrology does not happen to you. It speaks through you. These transits don't determine your future. They reveal opportunities for awareness, for growth, and for conscious choice. So before we begin, if you enjoy this type of content, please take a moment to like, subscribe, share the video. It truly helps the channel grow and allows me to continue creating these deeper astrological explanations. Also, many of you have been enjoying my new workshop, The Language of the Houses, where we take an in-depth look at the psychological, spiritual, and practical meaning of each house in the birth chart. If you'd like more information about that workshop, you can find the link in the description box. And if you're interested in working with me privately, whether it's through just a natal chart consultation, a current astrology reading, secondary progressions, relationship, whatever, all that info can be found in the description box below. Now let's take a look at what this new Leo Aquarius nodal cycle might be teaching you over the next 18 months. Yeah, we're going to start with you, just because I decided to start with you. Now, the nodes move into Aquarius and your energy on July 27th. Now, this is the cycle that you're going to be doing this dance with Aquarius is officially beginning. And because the nodes move backwards through the zodiac, we're not looking at the end of a journey. We're standing at the very beginning of one. And the reason I say that is because as soon as the nodes go in, it's going to be 29 degrees instead of 0 degrees. I just don't want you to get confused if you guys are just learning astrology now. Now, the South Node is just entering Leo at 29 degrees in the first house, while that North Node just entering the 29-degree Aquarius in the seventh for you guys. So over the next 18 months, these nodes will slowly work their way back towards 0 degrees, unfolding a story that's fundamentally about your identity, your relationships, your self-worth, and actually your truth, right? So for those of you, especially if you're a Leo rising to a lesser degree sun or moon, you're likely to feel this one super personally. And the first thing to understand is that the South Node in your energy is not asking you to get rid of your Leonine qualities. You're not being asked to become less warm or less generous or less creative, less loving, less expressive, all those wonderful things you guys are. The South Node simply reveals the habits, the patterns, and the survival strategies that have become so familiar to you that you no longer realize you're operating from them. And for a lot of you, this cycle begins by exposing how much your identity has become wrapped up in being the strong one, the loyal one, the dependable one, the peacemaker for some of you. I know a lot of you are the fixers of the family, the caretakers of the family or the situation, or the person who somehow manages to keep the entire circus tent standing while everyone else is wondering, where did the popcorn come from? It's like they don't realize that you had to go and find it and you got it for them or brought it back, right? So that Leo energy is typically saying, don't worry, I've got it. Even when you're exhausted, even when you're overwhelmed, right? Even when you're carrying so much more than anyone else realizes, that South Node entering your first house begins a long process of asking a super uncomfortable question for a lot of you. And that is, who are you when you're no longer defined by what you do for everyone else? And that's not always an easy one to answer because when you've spent years being the responsible one and the helper and the giver or the emotional support human for half the people in your life, stepping away from those roles can feel really weird and very uncomfortable. And sometimes, a lot of times, people don't even know who they are underneath that role that they've been playing. Now, meanwhile, the North Node going into Aquarius in the seventh house is introducing this lesson that's going to guide the next 18 months in the area of relationships and contracts. Aquarius is not interested in appearances, not interested in reality. Leo says, you guys say, but I love them. And Aquarius is like, I understand. Now tell me, what are they actually contributing to your life? And Leo's like, but I know they mean well. Aquarius is like, oh, that's so lovely. But what are they actually doing? You know, Aquarius isn't cold. Aquarius is objective. Aquarius looks at reality. And over the next year and a half, a lot of you with this activation will begin seeing relationships through a much clearer lens than you have up to this point. As the question is gradually going to be shifting from how much have you invested to is this relationship, I'm not even going to say worth it, is it reciprocal? Not that you're keeping score, but the giving, when you're only getting the dribble back, that's going to be recognized here. And there's a big difference, between love and reciprocity. There is big difference between loyalty and balance. And there's definitely a difference between participating in a relationship and carrying one. And I know a lot of you feel that way right now, right? You carry luggage, Leo. You carry luggage. You participate in partnerships, right? You do. And that North Node in Aquarius begins teaching you that lesson. What makes this especially fascinating is that the North Node is immediately receiving support, both from Eris retrograde in Aries and Chiron newly entered in Taurus. Let's start with Eris, okay? Eris in Aries in that ninth house is the archetype of disruption. It's not chaos, though, for chaos' sake. It's not. It's truth for the sake of liberation, right? So psychologically, Eris has a habit of exposing the stories that you've been telling yourself that no longer hold up to any real honest scrutiny. So you could find yourself questioning long-held beliefs that you've had, beliefs about relationships, about family, about fairness, about what you're supposed to tolerate, about who you're responsible for, and about what love is supposed to look like. There's nothing polite about Eris, nothing. Eris arrives carrying a flashlight and just starts opening up the closets that you really don't want opened. That's what he does. And while that might not be comfortable, it's often super freeing. So you can discover that some of the explanations that you've been using for years are just no longer working, no longer satisfying, where you're like, hold on a second, is that actually true? Or is that just the story that I've been using to make sense of something really painful in my life? That's Eris. And because she's supporting the North Node, those realizations become catalysts for growth rather than as sources of any sort of destruction for you. Now, at the same time, Chiron just moved into Taurus in the 10th house and is also supporting, which is also supporting this nodal story. Okay. So that Chiron in Taurus often reveals wounds connected to value, worth, deserving, security, and even self-respect. Not self-esteem, but it's more like worth. And those are two different things, right? His self-esteem asks, am I okay? Am I good enough? Right? Worth asks you if you believe that you deserve stability, reciprocity, respect, and care, right? And a lot of people question this, right? I mean, when they have this kind of activation, it's not uncommon to just discover that you've unconsciously connected your worth to your usefulness in life, right? Recognizing where you feel valuable when you're helping, when you're fixing, when you're carrying, and when you're sacrificing, when you're exhausted. right? There's value in being exhausted, right? For a higher purpose. But Chiron looks at that whole arrangement and is like, no, we need to have a little bit of a conversation because, contrary to popular belief, burnout is not a personality trait, Neither is self-sacrifice a requirement for love of any kind. When I say love, the seventh house could be an intimate partner, could be your spouse, could also be your best friend, it could be your boss, it could even be your clients, for goodness sake. I mean, all of this is going to be coming to the forefront. So over the next year and a half, a lot of you are going to start healing old wounds around receiving whether it's support or appreciation, reciprocity, or just receiving care without immediately feeling obligated to earn it. Right? Now let's talk about the enormous concentration of energy in Leo because this is so impossible to miss, right? As the South Node is sitting with the Sun, the Vulcan, Hygeia, and Jupiter all clustered together in the first house. This is a giant spotlight shining directly onto your identity, Leo. The universe is essentially saying, we need to talk about you. And if you're someone who's much more comfortable focusing on everybody else's issues rather than your own, this can feel a smidge inconvenient for you, but you're not going to be able to escape it because the sun in your energy is illuminating, right? Because when they switch, the sun's going to be in your energy, is going to be illuminating your sense of self. Spotlight's going to be in your energy. Hygeia is drawing attention to what's healthy and what's not. And Vulcan is applying pressure and refinement. And of course, Jupiter expands awareness. So you throw all of these cats together here, and there's a powerful process of incredible self-discovery. Hygeia often manifests through heightened awareness of what your body can no longer tolerate. And a fascinating thing to me about Hygeia is that the body usually knows before the mind does, right? Because your mind is saying, everything's fine, I'm fine, Meanwhile, your nervous system is like, not okay, right? Not. Your shoulders are tight. It's like your body has submitted like an official complaint to you, right? Your stomach has like it's filled with paperwork and your sleep is quietly like just kind of like left the chat, right? There's definitely like this disconnect between mind and body, right? And Hygeia is going to reveal this though. Hygeia reveals where emotional, relational, and psychological stress has accumulated for too long. Remember, I mean, you even just look at her symbol. Hygeia is the medical symbol. It's our physical health, it's our mental health, it's our emotional health, right? And the goal here of Hygeia is not to punish you. It's about awareness. It's about awareness. Now, Vulcan's there, and Vulcan adds another layer. Vulcan is the forge, it's the heat. He's the refinement process. Everybody wants transformation. Nobody wants to go through the pain of it. We all love the idea of transformation and change and all of this. But nobody wants to do the melting part. The melting part is not fun, right? Because in order to transform, part of us must melt, right? But Vulcan understands that authenticity is so important and that authentic identity is forged only through pressure, right? So you're really needing to look at who you are when the expectations and the obligations and the roles and the performances, very Leonine energy, begin falling away. Who's underneath all those things, all those masks that you wear? Because that's who the cycle is trying to reconnect you with, the version of you under all of those things. And then we come to the most, I think, one of the more powerful aspects in your chart, obviously, is Jupiter in your energy, opposing Pluto retrograde, though, and Juno retrograde in the part of fortune in Aquarius across that first house, seventh house axis. So this is where, I mean, that axis is the axis of mirrors anyway, but relationships truly become mirrors. Jupiter expands awareness, Pluto exposes hidden power dynamics, and Juno represents commitments, agreements, and long-term partnerships. So as Jupiter expands your awareness of yourself, right, in the first house, In the seventh house, Pluto was revealing where these relationships have become imbalanced, not necessarily because someone is bad, and not necessarily because someone is intentionally harming you, but because certain dynamics may have developed that no longer support growth. So maybe you're noticing where you've overfunctioned, or where you've carried too much, or where you've compensated for someone else's lack of effort, where you've making the mistake of confusing endurance for intimacy. Because surviving a relationship and thriving within a relationship, they're not the same thing. And Pluto in that seventh wants honesty, and Juno wants evolution. And Jupiter makes it increasingly difficult to ignore what you've already known for a while deep down. And the deeper lesson of this entire nodal cycle is not about becoming less loving, and it's not about becoming detached or building walls, right? Those are the things that we typically attribute to Aquarius, but it's about recognizing the difference between giving from love and giving from obligation. Because the South Node is asking you how much of your identity has become tied to being needed. And that North Node in Aquarius wants to know what would happen when you start valuing mutuality as much as you value loyalty. And Eris is telling you very loudly, tell yourself the truth, Leo. Chiron is saying, know your worth, Leo. And Pluto is saying, look honestly, like really honestly, at the power dynamics within that situation. While Jupiter is reminding you that you already know more than you've been willing to admit. And by the time these nodes reach 0 degrees, 18 months from now, many of you will have a very different understanding of relationships, of self-worth and identity, and not because you became someone else, but because you finally stopped defining yourself through a role or roles that were never meant to carry the weight of your entire identity. And that may be one of the most liberating journeys that this nodal cycle has to offer. So that is what I have for you guys. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I'll see you next time. I hope that was helpful. For Virgo risings, this nodal cycle carries a very different psychological tone than it does for many of the other signs, because the emphasis is not primarily on external relationships or public identity. It's focused on relationships that you have with yourself, particularly the parts of yourself that operate beneath your conscious awareness, in that subconscious realm. As with the South Node newly entering into Leo in the 12th house, joined by the Sun, Hygeia, Vulcan, and Jupiter, an 18-month process begins in which unconscious patterns, hidden motivations, and long-standing emotional habits gradually come into view for you. Now, the 12th house is often where we store unresolved fears, old disappointments, self-defeating beliefs, and emotional needs that we've learned to suppress. And a lot of you spend so much time helping others, solving problems, managing responsibilities, and just focusing on what needs improvement that you rarely stop to actually ask yourself what you need emotionally. And because of that, unmet needs can become buried so deeply that you operate from behind the scenes without conscious awareness. You don't even realize it. And this nodal cycle is going to be lighting that up for you, those hidden dynamics that you've been trying to keep buried. Now, the conjunction of the Sun, Hygeia, and Vulcan in Leo intensifies this considerably. The sun shines a light into the unconscious. Hygeia brings awareness to what's healthy and not, and Vulcan represents refinement through pressure. So if we throw all of these together, this does tell me that you're going into a period or into a season in which you may become increasingly aware of emotional patterns that you have, fears that you haven't been really looking at, old resentments, or even just self-concepts that have been quietly influencing your decisions for years. And there could be moments of profound realization over the next 18 months where you suddenly understand why certain situations continue repeating themselves. And Jupiter's presence there expands as he always does, but he's really amplifying everything he touches, which in this case would be your awareness, making it really difficult to ignore what's previously remained hidden in that 12th house of the hidden. So it's almost like the universe is turning on this light in a room that's been dark for years, for a very long time. And once you see what's been there hanging out, you can't unsee it. You know what I mean? Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And the fascinating thing about Hygeia is that the body often notices things before the mind does. So situations that you once tolerated may suddenly feel completely exhausting, where they didn't used to exhaust you in the same way. Because your nervous system is becoming more sensitive to stress during this transit. And your body can begin communicating that certain emotional burdens have just become too heavy for you to continue carrying. It's as if your shoulders and your sleep patterns and your energy levels all decide to hold a meeting and collectively announce that some unresolved issue requires your attention, and they're not taking no for an answer. Now, opposing this very powerful 12th house concentration is the North Node newly entering that 6th house Aquarius. And while that South Node is illuminating the unconscious patterns, that North Node is showing direction of growth, right? So Aquarius in the 6th is asking you to become more objective about your daily life and your habits and your routines and your health and the choices that you make every day. It's asking you to stop operating solely from an emotional space of emotional programming and instead build a life based on what actually works for you. Now, over the next 18 months, a lot of you may find yourselves reevaluating long established routines, your work environments, health practices, daily obligations, right? The question becomes less about what's familiar and more about what's effective. And those are two very different things, right? Because the Aquarius side of the node is asking, like if you weren't operating from a place of old fears and old expectations or old habits, what would your life actually look like at this point? And the growth here comes through conscious choice rather than through that unconscious repetition. Remember, the 12th house is the unconscious repetition. So the fact that the North Node is receiving supportive sextiles as well from Eris retrograde in Aries and Chiron newly entering into Taurus, this suggests that this process is being helped by powerful opportunities for insight and healing. Eris in Aries in the 8th house acts like a truth teller, right? She is exposing these emotional realities that have been hidden beneath the surface for a while here. And that 8th house, it governs intimacy and trust and vulnerability and shared resources and psychological entanglements. Eris has very little patience for denial and tends to expose the truths that we would much prefer to avoid, right? Now, over the next coming months, you can find yourself confronting fears related to vulnerability and dependence and trust and abandonment. And for a lot of you, even emotional control. So situations that once felt really complicated can suddenly become amazingly clear to you. Eris often arrives with this uncomfortable, yes, but liberating realization that the story that you've been telling yourself about a situation may no longer be true. Now, at the same time, Chiron's entrance into Taurus in the ninth begins a deeper healing journey involving ninth house things, your beliefs, your values, your world's view, your sense of meaning. Now, Chiron and Taurus a lot of times will highlight wounds surrounding worth, security, deserving, and self-value. And in the ninth house, that healing process can involve questioning inherited beliefs, your cultural expectations, your religious teachings, family philosophies, or just assumptions that you've carried just in general about life for years. So you might be asking yourself what you genuinely believe rather than what you've been taught to believe. Questions about purpose and meaning and your own personal truth become increasingly important. Chiron invites you to develop a more grounded and authentic relationship with your own values rather than just relying exclusively on systems of belief that you've inherited from others, specifically like family, right? And one of the most psychological revealing aspects of the chart during this energy is opposition to Pluto retrograde. and Juno retrograde, as well as part of fortune, all in Aquarius. Now, Jupiter expands awareness. We know that he expands. And Pluto exposes hidden power dynamics, and Juno highlights the agreements and commitments that shape our relationship. So, as Jupiter illuminates unconscious material in that 12th house, Pluto is there, ready to reveal where power imbalances may exist within your life. You might begin realizing places where you've given away your authority or over accommodated others or tolerated unhealthy dynamics or maybe remained in loyal situations that just no longer support your growth. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that someone else does something wrong. So I don't want you to be hypervigilant about anybody doing anything wrong. A lot of times these patterns developed unconsciously over time, and Pluto's role is to bring awareness to what's been operating beneath the surface so that the transformation can become possible. And relationships and commitments and emotional contracts are likely to become mirrors reflecting aspects of yourself that are ready to be understood more deeply. Now, the deeper lesson of this entire configuration is that you can't heal what remains hidden. It's not possible. So that South Node in Leo in the 12th is beginning a process of bringing all of this unconscious material into awareness, while the North Node in Aquarius in the 6th is teaching you how to build a healthier, more conscious life from what you discover in the 12th house. Now, Eris encourages radical honesty. Chiron encourages healing through self-worth. And Pluto is asking you to examine those power dynamics, but with courage. And Jupiter is expanding your awareness of what has always been there beneath the surface. So over the next 18 months, this may feel like a series of external events or are more like these awakenings from within. Old fears, habits, beliefs, and emotional patterns gradually become visible. And once they become visible, you gain the ability to choose differently. And this is where the transformation of the nodal cycle begins. I hope that was helpful, Virgo. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I will see you next time. Take care. For you, Libra Rising, this nodal cycle shifts the focus away from personal identity and towards something much more complex, the relationship between your individual dreams and the people, communities, friendships, and social networks that surround you. And with that South Node newly entering Leo in the 11th house, joined by the Sun, Hygeia, Vulcan, and Jupiter, there's an 18-month little season coming up that's going to be asking you to examine where you've been seeking validation, belonging, approval, or significance through groups, friendships, audiences, organizations, social circles, or just all of these collective identities. Because the 11th house governs not only friendships and communities, but also your hopes and dreams for the future, right? It's your goals and gains and the vision that you carry for what your life is supposed to become. And as that South Node moves into Leo, in that space, a lot of you may begin realizing that some of your dreams and your goals and your affiliations have been shaped as much by the desire to be appreciated, recognized, or for some of you, even included, as by genuine alignment with your soul's growth. So this doesn't mean friendships are ending or communities are disappearing. It doesn't mean that at all. But instead, that South Node begins revealing where your need for acceptance may have quietly influenced your choices for what it is that you're doing or where you're at in your life. So you can start questioning whether certain relationships are truly reciprocal or whether you've been performing a role in order to maintain connection, in general. Some of you may discover that you've become the caretaker of the group or the mediator or the encourager, or the one that everyone calls when there's a problem while receiving far less support than what it is that you provide. Now, others of you may realize that you've spent years pursuing goals that maybe they looked impressive from the outside, but just no longer feel meaningful for you anymore internally. And Leo in the 11th often wants to be valued by the collective. And that South Node starts asking whether you've confused being needed with being genuinely fulfilled. Now, the conjunction of the Sun, Hygeia, Vulcan, and Jupiter intensifies this awakening. The Sun shines a powerful light on your social world as well as your future aspirations, especially where you see yourself going over the next 10 years. Now, Hygeia increases awareness of what is healthy and unhealthy within friendships, communities, and long-term goals. So Vulcan represents pressure, refinement, and the process of burning away, just what's no longer authentic for you. And Jupiter expands everything it touches, right? Making it difficult to ignore everything that you discover in that area. So together, these symbols suggest a period of profound honesty about specifically where you belong and who truly supports you and which dreams still resonate with your evolving sense of self. Some friendships may deepen because they're built on authenticity. Others may begin feeling increasingly uncomfortable because they require you to remain a version of yourself that, quite frankly, you've outgrown at this point. Now, Hygie's involvement is particularly interesting here because she often manifests through subtle emotional and physical signals. So you might notice that certain social situations leave you exhausted instead of energized. You can become more sensitive to group dynamics, emotional obligations, friendships that feel one-sided. And the body has this remarkable way, really, of identifying what's unhealthy long before the conscious mind catches up. So your nervous system can quietly begin informing you that some connections are nourishing while others are just draining you. It's as though your inner wisdom is conducting a review of your entire social life, and it's asking which relationships genuinely support you and your well-being, right? This 18-month transit's going to have you shaking the dead wood off the tree. It will be. Now, opposing this Leo concentration is the North Node newly entering into Aquarius in the fifth house of children, creativity, joy, self-expression, romance, individuality, personal passion. It's joy, it's fun, it's vacations, it's fifth house, taking a chance, monetizable talents, having your own business. This is the house where we co-create with God, and this is where growth is occurring for you. So, sounds good, right? Now, while that South Node is asking you to examine your relationships with the collective, really evaluating your future, your goals and gains. Money for retirement is even in that 11th house, by the way. It's a money house. We don't talk about that a lot. But that North Node is asking you to reconnect with yourself. That Aquarius in the fifth wants you to stop defining yourself through group approval and begin discovering what genuinely excites you, inspires, and fulfills you as an individual. So over the next 18 months, you may feel increasingly drawn toward creative projects or unique interests, right? Keep in mind, Aquarius is very unique. It's very out of the box, right? You may be drawn to personal passions or forms of self-expression that don't necessarily make sense to everyone else around you. Because Aquarius just simply asks you one very simple but very powerful question. If nobody else's opinion mattered, Libra, nobody else's mattered, what would you create? What would you pursue? What would bring you happiness and joy? And that North Node supportive sextile to Eris retrograde in Aries and Chiron newly entering into that Taurus energy there for the summer suggests that this process of self-discovery is being helped by opportunities for both truth and healing. Now, Eris and Aries in the seventh house acts as catalysts within relationships. Eris is not interested in maintaining superficial harmony. She has no interest in it. She exposes truths that have been buried beneath politeness, compromise, or avoidance. Right? Now, we know you guys don't like confrontation. You guys are the scales. You guys are the sign of can everyone just get along? You don't want the confrontation. But anything that's been avoided, Eris is like, no, no, right? Now, in the seventh, this can manifest through significant realizations about your partnerships, your friendships, your clients, family members, any one-on-one relationship. So you can begin recognizing where you've been accommodating others at the expense of your own authenticity. So you may even notice where you've remained silent in order to keep the peace. Eris often arrives with this uncomfortable realization that harmony built upon self-abandonment isn't true harmony at all. Her gift is helping you reclaim the parts of yourself that you've sacrificed in order to maintain relationships. Now, at the same time, Chiron newly moving into that Taurus energy in the eighth house begins a healing journey around trust and vulnerability and intimacy, self-worth, and emotional security. Chiron in Taurus frequently highlights wounds connected to deserving and value and stability. And in the eighth house, these themes often show up through deep emotional bonds, shared resources, financial entanglements, or just questions of trust. So you might find yourself confronting fears related to dependence and vulnerability and betrayal, or even just emotional exposure. A lot of you with this activation can begin questioning whether you truly believe you deserve support from others, or whether you've unconsciously adopted the belief that you have to carry everything yourself. Now, Chiron's healing process often involves learning that intimacy is not weakness and that receiving can be just as important as giving, if done with grace and done well. Now, one of the most psychologically significant aspects of this energy here that we have cumulatively is Jupiter's opposition of Pluto retrograde, Juno retrograde, and part of fortune, all in Aquarius across in that 11th and 5th house axis here. Of course, Jupiter expands awareness. We know that. Pluto likes to expose hidden power dynamics. Juno highlights those commitments and agreements that are in your life. And part of fortune points towards growth and fulfillment. And Jupiter is going to be lighting up your social world in this space. Pluto is going to be revealing, though, where the power imbalances exist within friendships, networks, groups, communities, romantic situations, or even creative pursuits. You might even begin to notice where you've compromised your individuality in order to just maintain acceptance. You might recognize where you've given too much authority to collective opinions or allowed the expectations of others to shape your future. Pluto's role is not to destroy, but to reveal. It's very different. And once you begin becoming aware of these dynamics, transformation is possible. Now, the deeper lesson of this entire configuration is that belonging should never require self-abandonment. And that South Node Leo in the 11th begins exposing where you've sought validation through groups, friendships, or external approval. And the North Node in Aquarius in the 5th encourages you to rediscover your own unique voice, creativity, individuality, like your own unique everything. And Eris asks you to tell the truth within relationships. It's not an energy just to play nice. Chiron is asking you to heal wounds surrounding trust and worthiness, and Pluto is asking you to examine those dynamics. And Jupiter is making it really difficult for you to ignore any of it. So for the next year and a half, a lot of you may discover that, fulfillment comes not from being accepted by everyone, but from being authentically who you are. The goal isn't to disconnect from others here. The goal is to participate in relationships and friendships and communities without losing yourself in the process. And by the end of this cycle, you may find that your greatest sense of belonging comes not from fitting in, but from finally allowing yourself to stand out in a way that's most authentic for you. So I hope that was helpful, my friends. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. For Scorpio rising, this nodal cycle brings the focus to one of the most important psychological axes in the chart, and that's the 10th house, 4th house. Those are angular houses, and they're very important. This is the axis of your public and your private life, achievement and emotional security, visibility, and your inner foundation, right? It's reputation, 10th house, home, 4th house. And with the South Node newly entering into Leo in the 10th, joined by the Sun, Vulcan, Hygeia, and Jupiter, and a year and a half process starts here that's asking you to examine how much of your identity has been tied to accomplishment or recognition or responsibility, public image, career, just authority, or being seen as capable in one way or another. Now, Leo in the 10th wants you to shine. It wants to be respected. It wants to be known for something meaningful. But with the South Node here, the question becomes whether the role that you play in the outer world has begun to cost you something internally. Now, this doesn't mean that you're being asked to abandon ambition or purpose or leadership or visibility or anything like that. It means that you're being asked to notice where you need to hold everything together publicly. That may be preventing you from being honest privately. Scorpio rising in particular to a lesser degree sun and moon is already an energy that can carry a tremendous amount without showing it. Now add Leo in the 10th, and there could be a very strong desire to appear strong and impressive and competent and composed and unfazed, like you have it together, right? The problem is that nobody is actually unfazed. Nobody's like that. Some people just have a better way of handling it. They chronically live in better lighting, or they have a better poker face, a stronger poker face. But over the next 18 months, this cycle will likely reveal where you've become over-identified with being the one who succeeds and leads and performs and manages, or at the very least has it together and remains in control. Now, the conjunction of the Sun, Hygeia, Vulcan, and Jupiter in Leo intensifies this 10th house story. The Sun shines a light on your public identity and your life direction. Hygeia brings a lot of awareness to what's healthy and unhealthy in that space, in your work, in your responsibilities, your ambitions, and your relationship with achievement. Now, for a lot of you, if you still have your mom with you, 10th house is the manifestation of mother energy as well. There could be a lot of real honest realizations going on, stark realizations, I suppose I should say, having to do with mother energy. Now, Vulcan is there. Vulcan represents pressure, refinement, and the process of becoming stronger through heat. And Jupiter expands everything it touches, right? Making it much harder to ignore what's been building up. So together, putting all of these symbols together suggests that you may become increasingly aware of where professional obligations, public expectations, family expectations, or the pressure to succeed have all just become too heavy. Just needing to look like you have it all together, that pressure. Your body and your nervous system may begin signaling that certain responsibilities are just no longer sustainable. Because Hygeia really does have a way of saying, okay, your resume looks great, but how's your nervous system doing? Or those plans that you have in your mind for your future look great, but how's that level of anxiety hanging out? Do you know what I mean? It's like that dynamic is going on. Now, Vulcan adds the sense that your public identity is being refined. This is not about failure, Scorpio. It's not. It's about authenticity. You may begin questioning whether the goals that you've been pursuing still reflect who you're becoming. You're likely going to be asking yourself whether you're building a life from genuine purpose or from pressure or pride or survival or expectation or the need to prove something, right? Now, Jupiter in Leo can bring opportunities and visibility and recognition or growth in the career sector, but because it's with that South node, those opportunities may also reveal old patterns. So you may receive attention and still realize that attention is not the same as peace. Because you want peace, and you may achieve something that still feels internally unsettled. That's not a sign that something is wrong with you or that something is going off the rails. It's a sign that your inner life is asking you to be included in the definition of success. I want you to think about that, right? You have to be included in that definition of success. So it becomes less about what you have and who you're with and, all of the external things and really doing some serious checking in with yourself. Now, opposite this powerful Leo concentration is the North Node newly going into that fourth house Aquarius. And this is where the growth path begins. That Aquarius fourth house is asking you to build a more honest emotional foundation, right? Most of you know, if you don't, I will tell you the fourth house governs home and family and roots and ancestry, your private life, your ability to feel emotionally safe, and just the inner world, that inner self that exists when nobody else is watching. And so that's where that North Node energy is. And it's asking, Who are you when you're not performing competence for the world? It's asking you to really make some room for emotional truth and private healing and a different kind of security, right? This can be really profound because your outer life may have been demanding so much strength for so long that vulnerability can feel almost suspicious. Is this growth or am I just tired? Sometimes it's both, but a lot of you are very tired right now from this. So over the next year and a half, a lot of you may feel pulled to reevaluate your home life, your family patterns, your living situation, your emotional needs, or your relationship with the past. And you may begin to see how early conditioning shaped your need to be strong and successful and impressive, or at the very least, in control. And the North Node in Aquarius doesn't want you to cling to those old emotional patterns simply because they're familiar. It's asking for objectivity around family and your inner life. And it's asking you to look at the emotional system that you came from and decide what you want to continue and what are you ready to interrupt. This is not about blaming the past. It's not. It's about no longer letting the past quietly run your present life. Now, the North Node sextile to Eris retrograde in Aries in the sixth house adds another important layer. Eris in the sixth house disrupts unhealthy daily patterns and work dynamics and obligations and routines. She exposes where you've been functioning in survival mode and calling it normal. And this could show up as frustration with work, exhaustion from your daily responsibilities, or just a sudden unwillingness to keep doing things the way that they've always been done. Because Eris in Aries is like, what exactly are you doing all of this for? Who decided it was your job to do A, B, and C? It could bring irritation, but irritation isn't always bad here, especially with Eris, because sometimes irritation is the first sign that your boundaries are trying to come back online. Now, psychologically, Eris in the sixth may reveal where you've been overworking, over fill in the blank, over functioning, over serving, or just allowing your daily life to be shaped by crisis management. It supports the North Node by helping you create a private life that's actually livable. If your routines and your work habits, your health practices, or your service roles are not constantly draining you, Eris will not let you pretend it's fine. If all of these things are draining you, Eris says, okay, you can't keep doing this anymore. She's not subtle. She's not subtle, but she's very effective. And Chiron moving into that Taurus energy in the seventh also supports this nodal story because Chiron in Taurus speaks to wounds around worth and value and stability and trust and deservingness. That's even a word, right? In the seventh house, those wounds are activated. They're activated through a relationship. So a lot of you may be seeing where partnerships have touched old insecurities around being valued and supported and chosen, or maybe even treated with consistency. You know what I mean? So a lot of times people are there and they're totally present, and then they're not, and then they are. For a lot of you, this can involve a marriage, or others of you, a close friendship, business partnership, even clients are seventh house, doctors are even seventh house, any important one-on-one connection. And Chiron in that seventh is asking whether you truly believe you deserve relationships that are steady and respectful and reciprocal. Now, for a lot of you, this can feel quite tender because there may be a tendency to expect intensity more easily than to comfortably accept peace and expect peace. Sometimes the nervous system becomes so familiar with emotional complexities that calm can feel boring or even unsafe. And Chiron in Taurus is asking you to heal your relationship with stability, like that whole separate relationship. It's asking you to stop confusing inconsistency with passion, control with security, or endurance with love, right? The healing comes through allowing relationships to become simpler and steadier and more grounded. And yes, simple can feel very sus at first, right? As the kids say, right? You're like, hold on a second. What's going on here? This simple is not comfortable, right? But sometimes simple is not a red flag. Sometimes simple is healing. It just is. And then we have Jupiter and Leo opposing Pluto retrograde, Juno retrograde, and part of fortune in Aquarius across the 10th house, 4th house axis. And this is one of the most psychologically significant pieces of your chart right now. Jupiter expands your public visibility, your ambition, your awareness of your role in the world. And Pluto in Aquarius exposes these deep emotional truths connected to the 4th house, right? Your first family, home, your private life, right? And Juno retrograde brings commitments and emotional contracts up for review. While the part of fortune is suggesting that fulfillment is found not through performing strength, but through building an inner life that actually supports you. So all these energies happening at the same time, which I think is beautiful. This opposition can reveal this tension between who the world thinks you are and what's actually happening to you behind closed doors. And you may begin recognizing where public success or your reputation and how people view you has been compensating for this private unrest. You might see where family dynamics or emotional history or unresolved inner wounds have influenced your career choices or your need to prove yourself or the plan for your future, right? Because 10th house is not only about your career, it's those long-term plans for your future. Or you may be realizing these things having to do with a mother energy. Now, Pluto in the 4th house doesn't allow superficial emotional foundations to remain untouched. It doesn't. It's like we're going down, we're going into the basement, right? Then you guys know, of all people, that the basement is where the real material is stored. You guys know that. You guys have the biggest basement out of the entire zodiac, right? Now, the deeper lesson of this configuration is that success cannot replace emotional security. Having that future figured out, it can't replace that space of emotional security. Recognition cannot replace belonging, and achievement can't replace inner peace. We know that cognitively, but we have to feel it in our gut. Now, that South Node in Leo in the 10th begins exposing where you've been overly identified with your role in the world and other people. And that North Node in the 4th, and that Aquarius energy is asking you to build a more honest, liberated, and emotionally sustainable foundation within yourself and within your home environment as well. Now, that Aries in the 6th house asks you to stop normalizing unhealthy stuff. Stop normalizing unhealthy choices. 6th house is the house of health. Getting real honest with you about your food, about your drinking, about your relationships. Chiron in the 7th is asking you to heal your relationship with stability and reciprocity, and Pluto in the 4th is asking you to tell the truth about what has shaped you. And that Jupiter in the 10th expands the realization that the life that you're building, it has to nourish you, the person who's living it. So over the next year and a half, a lot of you may feel as though your outer life and your inner life can no longer remain separate. They just can't. That professional role or the long-term plans for your life, the family story, the relationship patterns, the daily habits, and the private emotional world all begin speaking to one another, whether you like it or not. And the goal here is to not disappear from public life or give up on ambition or creating some sort of really cool new goal for yourself moving forward. The goal is to stop building success on top of emotional exhaustion. And by the end of this cycle, this year and a half cycle, you're likely going to understand the real power is not just being admired for what you can handle. Real power is really creating a life where you no longer have to handle everything alone. Okay, my friends? So that is what I have for you. I hope that was helpful in some way. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. For Sagittarius Rising, this nodal cycle activates one of the most fascinating and psychologically important axes in the chart. That is the 9th house, 3rd house. This is the axis of belief versus reality, wisdom versus information, big picture versus the everyday details, and perhaps most importantly, the stories you tell yourself about life versus the life that you're actually living. And with the South Node newly entering Leo in the ninth house, joined by the Sun, Hygeia, Vulcan, and Jupiter, an 18-month process is starting that's asking you to examine your beliefs and your philosophies and your assumptions and convictions and long-held visions about how life is supposed to work. And for a lot of you, this can feel especially personal because the ninth house is naturally associated with you and your rulers at planet's domain, right? You guys naturally live in the ninth house. You're very at home here. And this is where ninth house is where we all seek freedom. It's where we develop our worldview and where we decide what's true and what matters and what we believe about love and success and purpose and spirituality and relationships and just life itself. And that South Node entering Leo there suggests that some of those beliefs may be ready for revision. And not because they were wrong, but because you've outgrown them. And a lot of you may find yourselves questioning assumptions that you've been carrying for the longest time. You may begin asking whether certain dreams still belong to you or whether they belong to a younger version of yourself. You might question philosophies and spiritual beliefs, some of you educational goals or family teachings, or ideas about what success and happiness should even look like. And Leo in the ninth house can become deeply attached to being right, not necessarily in an arrogant way, but in the sense that it becomes invested in a particular narrative. And this cycle may gently or not so gently, depends how you handle it, challenge those narratives. Because the universe may essentially be asking you, what if the story that you've been living by is only part of the story, right? That could be a little unsettling. As human beings, we prefer certainty. We do. Even when certainty isn't working, especially when certainty isn't working, at least it's familiar. Right? Now add that we have this conjunction to the Sun, Hygeia, Vulcan, and Jupiter amplifying this process dramatically, right? The Sun illuminates your belief system and life direction here. Hygeia brings awareness to what is psychologically healthy and unhealthy within those beliefs. Vulcan represents pressure and refinement and transformation through heat. And Jupiter expands everything it touches and makes the lessons here impossible to ignore. So together, they're suggesting a profound period of philosophical awakening for you guys. So you may suddenly become aware of beliefs that have quietly limited your growth. Belief about what you deserve, belief about what's possible, belief about relationships and success and aging and failure, about who you're allowed to become. And the fascinating thing about Hygeia here is that she often exposes unhealthy patterns before the conscious mind is ready to acknowledge them. She's like that wherever she is. And sometimes the body starts objecting to something before the beliefs catch up. So it's like your mind is saying, okay, this is how life works, right? Your mind is saying, but your nervous system is saying, I would like a second opinion to that. Your stress level is saying, actually, I would like several opinions on that, right? So it's like this double checking, triple checking. Jupiter's presence suggests that awareness is expanding rapidly, and that could be a little unsettling initially. So situations that once seemed obvious may suddenly appear much more complicated to you. Questions you thought were answered may reopen. New perspectives can emerge. Teachers, books, experiences, travel, education, or unexpected conversations can challenge old assumptions and introduce entirely new ways of seeing the world. Now, the ninth house is also, it's growth, obviously, but it's also advertising, marketing, launching, publishing, getting something out there to the world, right? So as if you're in a space where you're trying to get something out there to the world, this could manifest as you realizing that you may have to take a different angle Not that it's going to happen, but you don't want to close people off to their perspectives, right? You do want to be mindful of that. Now, opposite this concentration of Leo energy is the North Node newly going into Aquarius in your third house. And this is where the growth path begins. While that South Node is examining the broad philosophies and the long-held beliefs, that North Node is asking you to pay attention to what's directly right in front of you, right? Like that third house Aquarius is, let's deal with reality, Sagittarius, right? Remember, the third house governs perception and communication and learning and observation, daily interactions, the way we process information. Of course, it's also siblings and extended family. But the growth here comes through curiosity and listening and asking questions, and very importantly, remaining open. That South Node, ninth house can sometimes say, I already know that, right? That's the wise one, right? Sagittarius, ninth house, I already know that, right? We don't need to reinvent the wheel, right? But the North Node in the third is, are you sure? The third house, the natural ruler is Gemini. And that simple question can change everything. Are you sure? So over the next 18 months, a lot of you may find yourselves moving away from certainty towards inquiry. You may become more interested in gathering information than defending beliefs, more interested in conversation than conclusion, more interested in understanding than proving. And that's not weakness, guys. That's growth. That's growth. And the North Node supportive sextile to Eris retrograde in Aries in the fifth and Chiron newly in Taurus in your sixth house suggests that this transformation is being assisted through creativity and healing. So Eris and Aries in the fifth acts as a disruptive force within Aries connected to creativity, any sort of creative project, self-expression, entrepreneurial efforts, joy, romance, children, individuality. So psychologically, Eris is asking whether you've been editing yourself in order to be accepted. Have you softened your opinions, hidden your gifts, minimized your creativity, suppressed your passions, or just avoided taking risks altogether because you might upset someone? But Eris tends to expose where we compromise authenticity in exchange for approval, and that's what's going to be happening here. And she's not subtle. She's like a smoke alarm. That's just what she does. It's what she does. So you might find yourself reclaiming parts of yourself that have been dormant for years. Creative interests wake up, new passions come back to the surface. Romantic experiences may challenge old assumptions about who you are and what you truly want. Now, at the same time, Chiron, newly entering Taurus in the sixth, begins this healing journey involving self-worth and work and routines in daily life. Chiron in Taurus often highlights wounds connected to value and deserving. And in the sixth house, this can manifest as patterns of overworking, overgiving, perfectionism, self-criticism, which is constantly measuring your worth through productivity. So a lot of you might start asking, like, why do I feel guilty when I rest? Or why do I feel valuable only when I'm accomplishing something? Or why am I so much kinder to everyone else except myself? These are Chiron and Taurus questions. It just is. And the healing process involves learning that your value exists independently of your performance. You don't have to earn your worth. It's not every day. It's already there. You don't have to do it. Now, one of the most psychologically significant aspects here is this Jupiter energy in Leo, opposing Pluto retrograde, Juno retrograde, and part of fortune in Aquarius across that third house, ninth house axis. Jupiter expands awareness of your beliefs, as we said, philosophies, and worldview. Okay. Pluto exposes the hidden psychological dynamics. Juno brings long-standing commitments and agreements under review. And that part of fortune points towards where growth and fulfillment create greater authenticity. So this opposition can reveal where certain beliefs have been quietly controlling your choices without you even being aware of it. So you can discover that you've remained so loyal to an old narrative long after it stopped serving you. So you may recognize where family teachings, cultural expectations, relationship experiences, or personal disappointments shaped beliefs that no longer reflect who you're becoming. And Pluto asks always some uncomfortable questions, especially in an energy like this. What if the thing limiting you isn't your circumstances? What if it's the story that you've been telling yourself about your circumstances? Those aren't easy questions, but they're certainly transformational ones. Now, the deeper lesson of this entire configuration is that growth requires intellectual humility. And that South Node in Leo in the ninth begins exposing beliefs that have become rigid, outdated, overly attached to being right. And that North Node in Aquarius in the third encourages curiosity and flexibility and learning and openness. Eris in the fifth is asking you to reclaim your authentic self-expression. And Chiron in the sixth is asking you to heal your relationship with productivity and self-worth. Pluto is asking you to examine the narratives that have shaped your life. And Jupiter is expanding your awareness of the possibilities to something that once seemed unimaginable. So over the next year and a half, a lot of you may feel as though your worldview is evolving from the inside out. Old certainties can dissolve, new questions can emerge, long-held assumptions can be challenged, yet what initially feels like confusion is often the beginning of wisdom. And the goal of this cycle isn't to take away your faith or your vision or your sense of purpose. It's not at all. It's about refining them. So by the time these nodes reach 0 degrees, you may discover that true wisdom is not found in having all the answers. It's found in remaining open enough to keep learning and thinking about things from other perspectives in a real way. All right, my friends, I hope that was helpful. You take care. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. For Capricorn Rising, this nodal cycle brings the focus into one of the deepest psychological axes in the chart, the 8th house, 2nd house. And this is the axis of emotional entanglement and self-possession and shared resources, personal resources, intimacy, self-worth. What else is there? Dependency, autonomy. And with the North Node newly entering Leo in the 8th house, joined by the Sun, Vulcan, Hygeia, and Jupiter, an 18-month process begins that's asking you to really look at this space and where you've become too identified with crisis, emotional intensity, other people's needs, other people's money, other people's problems, or relationships that require you to merge so deeply that you forget where you end and the other person begins. Now, the 8th house is not a light territory. It's the house of trust, tough one, vulnerability, trauma, loss, intimacy, shared finances, psychological bonds, and the part of life that makes it say, okay, apparently we're doing some deep soul excavation today. Wonderful. It has us going deep there. With the South Node in Leo, there may be old patterns around needing to be important, needing to feel chosen or central within most important and intense emotional bonds. So you may have learned somewhere that love means carrying heavy things with people or for people, right? You may have associated loyalty with emotional endurance, or you may have believed or learned to believe that if you could prove your devotion through crisis and sacrifice or deep emotional investment, then you would finally feel secure. But the South Node begins asking whether intensity has sometimes been mistaken for intimacy. Now, the conjunction of the Sun and Hygeia, the Vulcan, and Jupiter, all in Leo, makes this absolutely impossible to ignore. The Sun highlights hidden emotional material. Hygeia brings awareness to what's healthy and not in those intimate bonds, in those financial entanglements and psychological patterns. And Vulcan represents the forge and the pressure and the heat that refine. And Jupiter expands everything. So whatever's been buried or squished down there becomes a lot larger and a lot more obvious. So this could bring a set of very powerful realizations around trust and control and attachment and fear, resentment, or even old grief. And the body may also become more sensitive to emotional stress, Hygeia has a way of saying, yes, I know you said you were fine, but your nervous system would like you to revisit that. So there's a lack of alignment there. Now, opposite all of that, the North Node newly in that Aquarius second house, this is where the growth is happening. You're being asked to reclaim your own value, your own stability, your own resources, and your own sense of inner security. So instead of finding safety through emotional merging and crisis bonding or being indispensable to others, the North Node asks you to build a life rooted in self-possession. Because that second house is really wondering and asking you what actually belongs to you. What do you value? What do you need? What makes you feel grounded without having to be attached to somebody else's chaos? And for a lot of you, this can be incredibly important because there's often this very strong capacity to endure and manage and provide and just hold it all together. But endurance is not the same as security. And sometimes it's just very organized suffering. Now, that North Node in Aquarius asks you to become more objective about worth. It's asking you to stop measuring your value by how much you can handle for others. And it's asking you instead to build practical, emotional, and financial independence in a way that feels freeing rather than isolating. And this may involve changes around money and boundaries and possessions and self-esteem, or at least the way that you define safety. Now, over the next year and a half, a lot of you may begin realizing that true security doesn't come from controlling every emotional outcome. It comes from knowing that you stand firmly in yourself, even when other people are unstable. Now, the North Node sextile to Eris retrograde in Aries in the fourth house adds a very powerful layer of truth-telling around family, home, roots, and emotional conditioning. Eris in the fourth house can disrupt old family patterns and expose truths that have been buried underneath politeness and loyalty or survival. So you can start seeing how your early environment shaped your relationship with control and safety and money and emotional dependence or responsibility. As in this space, Eris is likely going to be asking, who taught you that you had to be strong all of the time? And she's not going to ask you this quietly. She's not that gentle therapist with the herbal tea sitting in there waiting for you. She's not. She's more like the relative at a family gathering who finally says the thing that everyone's been avoiding for 20 years. That's her, right? So psychologically, in that fourth house, she could bring up frustration with family dynamics and living situations and ancestral patterns or the emotional roles that you've inherited. So you may begin recognizing where you've been carrying things that were never truly yours. And this doesn't mean that you stop caring. It means that you stop confusing love with emotional over-responsibility. Eris supports the North Node by helping you break free from inherited patterns that undermine your stability and your self-worth. Now, Chiron going into that Taurus energy in the fifth house also supports this little story because Chiron there speaks to wounds around worth and value and pleasure and deservingness, and just feeling secure in your own body and life, right? Just in general, that's the Taurian energy. And in the fifth house, the healing part comes through fifth house energy, your children, your joy, creativity, romance, self-expression, play, and the willingness to take up space without feeling guilty. So for a lot of you, this can be so tender because joy may not always be easy for you. Rest and just relaxing, to be able to relax, not easy. You're very good at responsibility, but pleasure can feel super suspicious. Am I allowed to do this, right? Shouldn't I be doing something useful? And Chiron in the fifth house gently reminds you that joy and happiness and rest isn't frivolous, it's part of healing. Now, this placement can also reveal wounds around being seen, celebrated, desired, or creatively expressed. So you start noticing where you've withheld your creativity or muted your happiness and joy because life required you to be practical and composed or responsible, right? And Chiron in Taurus is asking you to reconnect with this simple, grounded part of you that's able to remind you that life shouldn't be only about survival. It's asking you to let yourself want things enjoy things, create things, love things. And not because they're productive, but because they make you feel good and they make you feel alive, right? And then we also have this Jupiter and Leo opposing Pluto retrograde, Juno retrograde, and part of fortune in Aquarius across that second house, eighth house. So very psychologically significant energy here. Because again, Jupiter expands awareness of emotional entanglements, shared resources, intimacy, all that eighth house stuff. And Pluto in Aquarius exposes the power dynamics around money and worth, autonomy, and control. And of course, Juno retrograde brings agreements and commitments and relationship contracts under review. And there's the part of fortune sitting there saying that fulfillment comes through reclaiming your own stability, values, and self-respect. So put it all together. This opposition can show you where you've given away your power in intimate or financial situations, where you can start recognizing where you've allowed another person's needs and their fears and instability or resources to shape your sense of safety. Right? You may see where relationships have required too much emotional labor or where shared commitments have become unbalanced. And Pluto in the second is asking you to transform your relationship with worth from the inside out. You're not valuable because someone needs you. You're valuable because you exist, which sounds so simple, but for a lot of you, a lot of us, I'm Capricorn Rising, that is the whole healing journey right there. Now, the deeper lesson, though, of this configuration is that intimacy shouldn't require self-abandonment. I feel like we've been speaking about this. Right? The South Node in Leo in the eighth begins exposing where you've confused emotional intensity with love, crisis with closeness, or sacrifice with devotion. The North Node in Aquarius in the second is asking you to build a stronger relationship with your own worth and your own resources and values and inner stability. Now, Aries in the fourth house is asking you to tell the truth about family conditioning and inherited emotional roles. Tell the truth. That's what Aries wants. Chiron in the fifth is asking you to heal through joy, creativity, pleasure, self-expression. And Pluto in the second is asking you to reclaim your power over what you value, while Jupiter in the eighth is expanding your awareness of these emotional bonds that need to be transformed. Over this next year and a half, a lot of you are going to feel as though you're being asked to untangle yourself from these emotional contracts, or at least one important one. Now, this doesn't mean abandoning people that you love. It doesn't. It means no longer losing yourself inside the needs, the crises, the finances, or the wounds or the expectations of other people. The growth comes from learning that you can be intimate without being consumed. You could be loyal without being or feeling trapped. You could be generous without feeling or being depleted, and loving without handing over your entire self-worth on a silver platter. Okay. So by the end of this cycle, you're likely going to understand that true security is not found in controlling the bond. It's found in finally belonging to yourself. Okay, my friends. So I hope that was helpful in some way. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. For Aquarius risings, this nodal cycle is deeply personal because it activates the first and seventh house axis, the axis of self and others, independence and partnership, personal identity, relationship dynamics. So with that South Node newly entering Leo in the seventh, joined by the Sun, Vulcan, Hygeia, and Jupiter, an 18-month process begins that's asking you to really look at how much of your energy, identity, and emotional focus have been tied to other people. Now, this can include a romantic partner, spouse, close friend, your clients, your bosses, family members, or anyone with whom you have a significant one-on-one connection, right? Now, Leo in the seventh can create a powerful need to feel loved and chosen and admired and appreciated and just emotionally met through relationship. But with the South Node going into that area, the question becomes whether you have given too much power to other people's approval or their attention or their reactions or their recognition. Now, this doesn't mean that those relationships are bad, and it certainly doesn't mean that you're meant to become detached or cold. Aquarius risings already get accused of being detached enough, sometimes just, for needing 5 minutes alone just to process something without, a committee meeting or whatever, right? But this cycle doesn't ask you to become cold or anything like that. It's asking you to just be more conscious of where relationships have shaped your sense of self. Because you start realizing here that you've adjusted yourself around other people's needs and moods and expectations or egos more than you've understood up to this point. And that South Node in Leo in the seventh can show you where you've been trying to keep someone else happy, someone else impressed, someone else engaged, or keep a relationship alive through the sheer force of loyalty, of some sort of emotional labor. Now, that conjunction to the Sun, Hygeia, Vulcan, and Jupiter in Leo makes this relationship story impossible to ignore, as that Sun lights up the partnership dynamics, while Hygeia brings awareness to what's healthy and what's not in close relationships. Vulcan represents pressure, heat, and refinement wherever he is, and Jupiter expands everything. Relationship patterns that were once manageable can suddenly feel much larger and more obvious. You can begin seeing where a partnership has become unbalanced, or where admiration has replaced intimacy, or where loyalty has replaced reciprocity, or even just where you've been like performing a role in order to just keep the peace, right? And Hygeia has a way of saying, hey, this might look like love, but let's check that. Let's check the label there. Is it? Really looking at that very carefully. Now, Vulcan adds this sense that your relationship patterns are being forged into something more honest. This can feel intense because the seventh house is where we meet ourselves through other people, right? So sometimes another person's behavior becomes the mirror that shows us exactly where we've abandoned ourselves. And of course, nobody loves that mirror. Nobody, right? We all prefer the mirror with the flattering lighting. Right? But with this cycle is likely going to show you the truth about what certain relationships bring out in you. Do you feel more alive, more respected, more yourself? Or do you feel small or smaller, more anxious, more responsible, more dependent on someone else's validations, right? Now, opposing this powerful Leo energy is the North Node, newly in Aquarius in that first house in your energy. And that's where the growth path is happening for the next year and a half in your own sign. And you're being asked, quite frankly, to come back to yourself. It's asking you to develop a stronger relationship with your own identity and your own truth and your own instincts and your own freedom. With that energy in there, it's who are you when you stop organizing your life around how other people respond to you? This is a major psychological shift because instead of defining yourself through partnership or approval or whether someone chooses you or not, you're beginning to learn how to choose yourself. And again, that doesn't mean that you're breaking up with anybody, you're quitting a job. It's just like you're remembering to not forget yourself. And over the next year and a half, a lot of you may feel this growing need for independence and personal clarity and space, and even lots of self-honesty. So you may feel less willing to compromise your individuality in order to preserve a relationship dynamic that no longer fits in a way that feels right. Again, this doesn't mean that you're going to stop caring about people, about that relationship, that person, whatever it is. It means that you're just going to stop disappearing into the needs of other people. With that North Node in your energy, you're being asked to become more objective and more self-directed and a lot more honest about what you actually want. And it teaches you that a healthy relationship shouldn't require you to abandon your own center. Now, the North Node sextile to Eris retrograde in Aries in that third house. This adds a very powerful layer around communication. Eris in the third disrupts old patterns of speaking and listening and thinking and just interpreting reality. She exposes what's been left unsaid. She asks where you have softened your words, edited your truth, avoided the conversation, or just stayed quiet because you knew that the other person wasn't going to what you had to say. Eris in Aries is not exactly known for whispering gently from the corner. She's just not. She tends to walk in, flip on the lights, and just be like, so are we finally telling the truth here or what? Or are we just still pretending like everything is fine? Eris does not let that narrative fly, right? And now psychologically, Eris in the third can bring confrontations and realizations and honest conversations with sudden shifts in perception. So you can begin really understanding that your words matter and that silence has sometimes protected relationships at the expense of your own truth. So this aspect supports the North Node because it helps you to reclaim your voice, and it encourages you to say what you mean and name what, and stop translating your truth into something more convenient for that person to hear. Because Chiron newly entering into Taurus in the fourth, it does support that nodal story in a very deeply tender way. It's speaking to wounds around safety and stability and belonging and deserving. And in the fourth house, those wounds are rooted in family and home and childhood and conditioning and emotional security in your private self, and even ancestry. So this can begin an 18-month healing process around where you learned to feel safe or where did you not. You may begin recognizing how early emotional experiences shaped your relationship patterns, especially your need to be chosen and valued or reassured by others. Now, Chiron in the fourth asks you to build safety from within. It asks you to stop looking exclusively to relationships to provide emotional security that may have been missing in your earlier life. Now, this can be very emotional because the fourth house is not at all intellectual. It's ruled by the moon. So it's the inner child, it's the roots, it's the private heart, it's your emotions. And you guys can sometimes try to analyze feelings from a very safe distance. Interesting, right? I appear to be having an emotion, right? It's like that because we say that emotional disconnect. But when Chiron in the fourth is, no, we're not just observing here. We need to dig in. We need to go downstairs, get into the basement, unpack stuff and feel it, right? And the healing comes from creating a more grounded inner foundation and one that doesn't depend entirely on whether somebody else is available, attentive, or even approving of what it is that you're thinking, saying, or feeling. Okay. And we also have that Jupiter in Leo opposing Pluto retrograde, Juno retrograde, and part of fortune in this first house, seventh house axis. And this is one of the most psychologically significant parts of the energy during this nodal transition, because Jupiter expands the relationship pattern. Pluto in Aquarius is exposing the hidden dynamics, right? And identifying any sort of hidden power dynamics that are connected to identity and personal autonomy there. Juno retrograde brings the idea of commitments and agreements and marriages and all these things under review. Contracts, seventh house, your clients under review. And the part of fortune in Aquarius suggests that fulfillment comes through returning to yourself, reclaiming your independence, and just living more authentically. So putting all of those together, what this opposition shows is where a relationship has shaped your identity too strongly. You may see where you've given someone else too much influence over your choices, your confidence, your direction, your sense of self-worth, and whether it's that relationship or whether it's the connection to that boss or bosses or to your clients, whatever it is, you may begin recognizing where partnership has become a stage for power dynamics and control and projection or dependency. And with Pluto in that first house, it's like you're not here to be defined by somebody else's inability to see you clearly. And that could be a huge, powerful awakening. It could also be really uncomfortable because once you see the dynamic, it becomes much harder to stay in it, to keep participating in that unconsciously. You can't do it unconsciously, right? Now, the deeper lesson of this whole thing is that love should not require self-erasure. And that South Node in Leo in the seventh is beginning to expose where you've over identified with being loved, being admired, and chosen or validated by someone else. And that North Node in Aquarius in the first is asking you to come back to your own truth, your own freedom, and your own identity. And with that Eris in the third, you're being asked, third house speaking, you're being asked to speak honestly, Chiron in the fourth is asking you to heal those emotional roots of your need for safety and belonging. And Pluto in that first is like, reclaim your power, you know? Especially with that Jupiter in the seventh, it's just expanding your awareness of which relationships just support your growth and which ones just keep orbiting you around someone else's sun, you know? So over the next year and a half, a lot of you are going to feel as though relationships are becoming mirrors that reveal where you've lost contact with yourself, you know? Some relationships may evolve really beautifully because they can handle the greater honesty and freedom and authenticity. And a lot of you are going to be in great stead if you can handle that. But others of you may feel increasingly uncomfortable because, you know, someone else depends on you to remain in a role that they like you in, but that no longer fits you. And the goal is not to reject the connection. The goal is to stop confusing connection with self-abandonment. And by the end of the cycle, you'll understand that the healthiest relationships are not the ones where you're constantly chosen by someone else, but the ones where you never have to stop choosing yourself. It's pretty powerful. That's what I have for you guys. I hope this was helpful in some way. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye. For Pisces risings, this nodal cycle activates the 6th house, 12th house axis, which means for the next year and a half, it's not just going to be about what's happening externally for you guys, but about the relationship between your daily life and your inner world. And with that South Node newly entering Leo in the 6th, joined by the Sun, Vulcan, Hygeia, and Jupiter, there's a major emphasis on 6th house energies like work and health and routines and service and habits and responsibilities and just the way that you manage everyday life. Now, that South Node here begins exposing where you may have become over-identified with being useful, productive, needed, capable, or just constantly available. Now, Leo in the 6th house can take pride in being the one who handles things and fixes things and shows up and helps and organizes and makes it all work. But the question becomes, at what point does being helpful becomes self-neglect, you know, self-neglect with better branding, right? Under the guise of being helpful. So this doesn't mean that you're being asked to stop serving others or caring about your responsibilities at all, but it means that you're being asked to notice where your identity has become too tied to how much you can do. So you can start to realize that you've been or where you've been measuring your worth through productivity and usefulness and problem solving, or your ability to keep going even when your body, your mind, and your spirit are clearly waving that little white flag because you're tired. That South Node in Leo in the 6th can reveal where you've just been performing competence while quietly running on fumes. So you can look at this, you know, looks so functional from the outside to everybody, like, oh, got it together, right? But internally, there's this exhaustion and this resentment and this stress and this sense that, you know, your daily life has just become too demanding. Now, the conjunction of the Sun, Hygeia, Vulcan, and Jupiter intensifies this greatly because that Sun lights up your work, your routines, your health patterns, your daily obligations, all the 6th house things. And Hygeia brings awareness to what's healthy and not. Vulcan represents pressure, heat, and refinement, and Jupiter expands whatever it touches. So, whatever's been unsustainable in your daily life, you can't ignore it anymore. And this is where your body can just start speaking very loudly, right? Because Hygeia, she's the asteroid of health, often shows up through the realization that certain habits, schedules, work environments, or service roles are no longer supporting your well-being. So your body can just start saying like, I really appreciate your dedication to everyone in your life, but we are not a machine. And your body can just start fighting you, you know? And there you are going, oh, well, what if everybody else needs me? And your body's just going to be like, that sounds wonderful, but now please sit down. Like legit, your body's just going to be like, you have to listen to me. Now, opposite this Leo concentration is the North Node, newly entering Aquarius in the 12th house. And this is the growth path. So Aquarius in the 12th is asking you to step back from the constant doing and develop a more objective relationship with your inner life. The 12th house governs rest, solitude, surrender, and the unconscious, spiritual healing, hidden patterns, and the parts of ourselves that require quiet in order to be understood. So for a lot of you, this is a very deeply important placement that's going on, because it's asking you to stop confusing busyness with purpose. And that North Node in the 12th says that not every problem can be solved by working harder. Some things need to be released. Some things need to be grieved. Some things need to be understood at a soul level rather than just managed on a calendar. So over this next year and a half, a lot of you may feel this growing need for solitude and rest and spiritual reflection. And a lot of you are going to be doing emotional clearing. Maybe you're going to therapy, getting more into prayer or meditation, or just time away from overstimulation. And this doesn't mean withdrawing from life. I don't see that as being a thing. It can, depending on what else is in your chart. But generally speaking, no, it's more about learning to listen to the quieter parts of yourself that have been drowned out by obligation. And Aquarius in the 12th brings insight through detachment. So it's asking you to observe your patterns rather than simply repeating them. So you can begin seeing how unconscious fears have shaped your routines and your work habits and your health patterns, or your tendency to overextend yourself. And the growth here comes from learning that rest is not laziness. Rest is information. Rest is medicine. Rest is sometimes the only place where the truth can finally catch up with us, right? Now, that North Node's sextile to Eris retrograde in Aries in the second, this adds an important layer around self-worth, money values, and your personal security. Because Eris in the second house disrupts old beliefs about what you deserve. Right? She exposes where you've undervalued yourself, where you've undercharged, right? If you are like in a service business, or where you've overgiven or attached your worth to how much you can provide or tolerate. Now, Eris in Aries is not subtle. She is the part of you that suddenly says, okay, hold on a second. Why am I doing all of this for everyone and still questioning whether I deserve basic peace and quiet, or just basic peace within self? And this could be a powerful awakening around money, boundaries, possessions, and self-respect, and the right to claim your own needs without apology. Now, Chiron newly entering Taurus in the third house also supports this nodal story by beginning a healing process around communication and perception and learning, siblings, neighbors, and the way that you speak to yourself. Chiron in Taurus often speaks to wounds around money and security. And in the third, those wounds may show up through your voice. So you may begin noticing where you silence yourself, where you second guess yourself, or where you struggle to say what you need clearly. You may also become more aware of old mental patterns that keep you small. Oh, I shouldn't ask for too much, or I should just handle this, or my needs are inconvenient, or I don't matter, right? Chiron in the third is asking you to heal the way you think and speak about your own value, because your words become part of your medicine. This is so important, okay? Then we have Jupiter in Leo opposing Pluto retrograde, Juno retrograde, and part of fortune, all in Aquarius along that success 12th house axis. So this is one of the more psychologically significant parts of all of this, because there's a lot to put together here, right? Because Jupiter expands awareness of work and service and routines and health and daily responsibilities. And Pluto in Aquarius exposes the hidden psychological material and those unconscious patterns, and of course the buried fears. But Juno retrograde brings the commitments and the agreements that we have with other people under review, especially the invisible agreements that we may have with ourselves or even others. To just say, I will always be available to you, right? That's a commitment. I will always be here. Will always be available to you, right? I will always be your helper. I will not rest until everything is handled. Don't worry, I got it. It's like we need to be reviewing that right now. And the part of fortune in Aquarius is suggesting that fulfillment comes not from doing more, but from freeing yourself from unconscious patterns that have kept you over functioning, right? You don't want to go into the burnout space. And this opposition may reveal where your daily life has become a reflection of unresolved inner material. So you may begin seeing that your exhaustion is not just about your schedule, right? It can be connected to guilt or fear or old conditioning or perfectionism or the belief that you have to earn your right to rest. Pluto in the 12th is asking you to look beneath the surface. It's asking you, what are you really trying to prove by carrying so much? And that's not the most comfortable thing to think about, but it could also be liberating. The deeper lesson in all of this is that your worth, understanding that your worth isn't measured by your usefulness. That South Node in Leo in the sixth house begins exposing where you've become too attached to being needed, to being productive and responsible. And the North Node in the 12th is asking you to just develop a more conscious relationship to sleep and rest and surrender and solitude and spiritual healing. And Eris in the second is asking you to reclaim your value. Chiron in the third is asking you to heal your voice and your inner dialogue that you use to speak to yourself. And Pluto in the 12th is asking for you to look at those unconscious patterns, while Jupiter in the sixth is expanding your awareness of what your body and your daily life have been trying to tell you. So for this next year and a half, a lot of you may feel as though your body, your schedule, your work, and your inner world are all trying to get on the same page. And the goal isn't to abandon responsibility in order to make that happen, but the goal is to stop using responsibility as a reason to abandon yourself. So by the end of this cycle, you're going to understand that healing doesn't come always, does not come from doing more. Sometimes it comes from finally becoming quiet enough to hear what your soul has been trying to say all along. Okay, my friends, I hope that was helpful. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye. For Aries rising, this nodal cycle activates the 5th and 11th house axis, which means that for the next 18 months, you're going to be unpacking this very powerful psychological lesson around individuality, creativity, joy, romance, self-expression, friendships, communities, and the future you're trying to build. Now, with the South Node newly going into that Leo energy in the 5th, joined by the Sun, Vulcan, Hygeia, and Jupiter, there's a strong emphasis on the parts of life connected to being seen, celebrated, loved, desired, creativity, activated, something having to do with children as well, being activated. Leo in the fifth is such a beautiful energy. It's very exalted. Obviously, Leo lives in the fifth house. It wants passion and joy and romance and play and confidence and freedom to take up space. But with that South Node in there, the question becomes whether you've become too attached to being personally validated through those experiences, through your business, through your children, through relationships, right? Now, this doesn't mean that you're being asked to give up any of those things. You're not being asked to give up your joy, your creativity, or your romantic connections or your self-expression. Absolutely not. Nobody needs to confiscate the glitter, the love story, or the dramatic playlist. But the South Node begins exposing where the need to be admired and chosen and desired and special, creatively recognized, right? That all just may have been too tied up to your sense of self. So you start really beginning to realize that some form of attention no longer nourishes you. Some romantic patterns may begin to feel repetitive. Some creative expressions may no longer feel authentic, or some pleasures may start to reveal themselves as distractions from deeper growth. And that South Node in Leo in the fifth is asking whether you are expressing yourself from genuine joy and happiness or performing yourself in order to be seen, wearing that mask. And that conjunction of the Sun and Hygeia, Vulcan, and Jupiter intensifies this process because the Sun illuminates your creative life and romantic patterns in your relationship to happiness and the need for self-expression. And Hygeia brings awareness to what's healthy and what's not when it comes to the ways in which you seek pleasure and attention and validation or excitement. And Vulcan is that pressure energy. He represents pressure and heat and refinement, while Jupiter is busy over here expanding everything it touches. So all of these themes that we're discussing become really difficult to ignore So you may feel a very strong desire here to create and love and play and express and be recognized. But you may also become so much more aware of where old patterns are just no longer satisfying. Because Hygeia is gently asking you, is this real happiness and joy, or is this just emotional junk food with better lighting? Where what's really speaking to you? This is going to become something that you're going to want to be looking at. Now, opposite this Leo concentration is the North Node newly in that Aquarius energy in the 11th house. And this is where the growth path begins. As Aquarius in that 11th is asking you to connect your personal gifts to something larger than yourself, right? That 11th house governs friendships and communities and networks and audiences, if you have an audience, long-term goals and gains, collective visions. This is the future, is very 11th house, the future. And while that South Node in Leo may focus on personal recognition, the North Node in Aquarius really wants to understand how your uniqueness can contribute more to the collective. It's not asking you to disappear into the group. It's asking you to move beyond needing personal applause and begin aligning with people and communities and future goals that actually reflect who you're becoming. So for a lot of you, this can be a very important shift because Aries naturally says, I am, right? And Leo in the fifth is see me. But that Aquarius in the 11th is now bring that fire somewhere meaningful, right? It's I am, see me with that fire energy. And that 11th house is like, no, do something with it. So over the next year and a half, you may feel very drawn toward new friendships and communities and collaborations or audiences or some sort of long-term dream. And you may begin realizing that true fulfillment doesn't come from being admired as an individual, but from finding the people and causes that allow your individuality to matter in a larger context, right? Where it's actually feeding you. Now, that North Node's sextile to Eris retrograde in Aries in that first house makes this even more personal because Eris in the first can feel like an awakening of the authentic self, especially the parts of yourself that have been suppressed or dismissed or shamed or told to calm down. A lot of Aries are told to calm down. Now, Eris in Aries is not here to be convenient at all. She's the part of you that says, actually, I do have something to say. And no, I will not be making it smaller so everyone else could stay comfortable. Not doing it, right? And this can bring a stronger sense of your own personal truth with sharper boundaries and just this growing unwillingness to pretend that you're fine when you're not, to pretend like everything's okay when you know full well that some situation is just no longer feeling like a fit for you. So psychologically, Eris in the first can make you more aware of anger and frustration and courage and desire and instinct. So for a lot of you, this can be very powerful because it reconnects you with your raw sense of self, but it's also asking you to use that fire consciously. So the goal here is not to burn every bridge just because someone handed you a match, right? The goal here is to recognize where your authentic self has been waiting to come forward, and Eris supports the North Node by helping you stop performing for approval and just start showing up more honestly in communities and connections that are in your life. Now, Chiron newly entered Taurus in that second house also supports this nodal story by beginning this healing process around worth, value, money, stability, security, and self-respect. So Chiron in Taurus often reveals wounds around worth and deserving. And in that second house, this becomes deeply connected to self-worth. So you can start asking yourself whether you truly believe that you deserve peace and stability and resources and consistent support. You may also become aware of where you've tied your worth to being attractive and desired and creative and impressive and productive or useful. Because Chiron in Taurus says your value isn't dependent on all of those things, on the applause, on the attention, on performance, or anyone else's reaction to you. And this is important because that South Node in Leo in the fifth can sometimes seek validation through being loved and desired and admired or celebrated. And Chiron and Taurus in that second house is asking you to build better worth from within instead of that, right? It's asking you to create a steadier foundation, one that doesn't rise or fall based on whether somebody notices you or chooses you or compliments you or claps at the right moment, whatever it is. And yes, applause is lovely. All those things are very nice. We all like a little applause, right? But it can't be the entire emotional retirement plan for you. It just can't be at this point. And then we have Jupiter in Leo opposing the Pluto retrograde, Juno retrograde, and part of fortune in Aquarius, again, along that fifth house, 11th house axis. Jupiter, of course, expands your desire for joy, romance, all those fifth house things. And Pluto in Aquarius exposes hidden power dynamics within friendships, communities, social groups, audiences, and even your future goals, right? Somebody pulling a power play having to do with your future goals. If you have a spouse or a business partner. And Juno retrograde there brings these agreements and commitments under serious review, especially those connected to groups and friendships or any person where we have a shared vision for our future. Now, the part of fortune here wants fulfillment that comes through aligning with communities and goals that honor your individuality without requiring performance and doing, right? Now, this opposition can show where you've been caught between personal desire and collective belonging, right? You could start noticing where certain friendships or communities celebrate you only when you play a certain role, only when you do a certain thing, right? And you could start to see where romantic or even creative patterns have kept you focused on being chosen rather than choosing a larger future for yourself. And Pluto in the 11th is asking you to look honestly, super honestly, at your groups, at your friendships, at your networks that influence your life. Are they empowering you? Are they evolving with you? Or are they keeping you attached to some older version of yourself? Right? There's a deeper lesson here of this configuration is that being seen is not the same thing as being fulfilled. And that South Node in Leo in the fifth really begins exposing where you ought to consider where you've been seeking validation through romance, creativity, pleasure, attention, whatever, any kind of recognition. That North Node in the 11th in Aquarius is asking you to connect your gifts to something larger and more meaningful and more future oriented. And Eris in the first house is asking you to reclaim your authentic self, while Chiron in the second is asking you to heal your relationship with worth and security and deserving. Pluto in that 11th is asking you to examine your power dynamics in connection with the outer world. So over the next year and a half, a lot of you are going to feel as though you're rediscovering what authentic self-expression actually means. And some creative projects may come alive. Some romantic patterns may be questioned. Some friendships can shift. Some communities just may no longer fit with you. The goal is not to stop shining here. It's not. The goal is to shine in places where your light contributes to something real. So this way, by the end of the cycle, you're going to be able to understand that your individuality is not meant to exist in isolation, but it's meant to become a part of a larger vision, one where you don't have to perform in order to belong. Okay, my friends, that is what I have for you. I hope that was helpful. See you next time. So for Taurus rising, this nodal cycle activates one of the most important axes in the chart, which is the fourth house, 10th house. These are angular houses. This is the axis of home and career, private life and public life, emotional security and achievement, the inner world, the outer world, right? And with that south node newly entering into that Leo fourth house, joined by the sun, Hygeia, Vulcan, and Jupiter, just looking at your chart here, the next 18 months are likely going to bring some profound insight into your emotional foundation, family patterns, childhood conditioning, your living situation, and the ways that you've learned to create safety. Now, the South Node here begins exposing these old emotional scripts that quite frankly, have quietly shaped your life for years. And these are the beliefs and habits and loyalties and survival mechanisms that were often formed long ago and have become so familiar that at this point they just feel like part of your personality. Now, for a lot of you, security matters, and we talk about that a lot, right? When we talk about your energy, you generally prefer stability over chaos and consistency over uncertainty. But with that South Node moving through your fourth house, you may begin realizing that some of the things that you've called security were actually forms of emotional protection. So some family patterns may come under review, some old wounds may surface that you have to unpack, some inherited beliefs about responsibility, success, love, sacrifice, or even self-worth may begin asking for some examination. Now, the question becomes, and this requires being honest with you, are you creating a life from your authentic needs or from some sort of emotional programming that's just become familiar for whatever reason? Now, the conjunction of the Sun, Hygeia, Vulcan, and Jupiter amplifies this significantly as the Sun focuses on the foundations of your life here in that house. Hygeia brings awareness to what's healthy and not in your emotional world. Vulcan represents refinement through pressure, exposing what needs to be strengthened and what needs to be released. And Jupiter is busy expanding everything he touches, which means emotional realizations can feel larger than life. So you can become increasingly aware of family dynamics, unresolved emotions, old resentments, childhood narratives, or patterns that have shaped your sense of belonging. And this can feel like an emotional renovation project where the walls are still standing, but suddenly you're discovering that what's been hidden behind the walls needs to be unpacked now. Now, Hygie's involvement does bring the body into this conversation. You may find yourself becoming more sensitive to emotional stress, to family tension, environmental factors, or living situations that no longer support your well-being. And sometimes the body notices before the mind does, and your nervous system may begin sending messages that sound suspiciously listen. It's like, you've been carrying this emotional weight for years, and we would like to discuss alternative arrangements. Your body's speaking to you. The purpose here isn't to create instability, it's to help you recognize where true healing needs to happen, right? Because your body feels all of these things. Now, opposite this powerful concentration in Leo is that Aquarius North Node energy in the 10th. That's where the growth path is going to be happening. And that Aquarius in the 10th is asking you to just step into a more authentic public identity and a more liberated relationship with your purpose. And that South Node is looking at your roots, and that North Node is asking you to consider where you're going. And that 10th house governs career, reputation, standing in the world, visibility, contribution, leadership, the role that you play in the world, your long-term plans, right? Aquarius wants you to think differently about all of these things. He wants you to think differently about success. You're being asked to stop defining your future through inherited expectations and begin defining it through authenticity, whatever that means for you. Now, a lot of you can feel pulled toward career changes or leadership opportunities or public visibility or some sort of redefinition of a long-term goal during this cycle. The growth comes through becoming more objective about your potential, right? At really asking and answering, if you weren't limited by old family narratives, what would you build? Who would you be? What would you contribute? Who would you become? Right? The challenge is that stepping into a new future often requires releasing attachment of an old emotional identity. There's got to be this kind of like melting away, right? And that North Node sextile to Eris retrograde in Aries in the 12th adds a very powerful psychological layer here. As Eris in the 12th is often associated with truths that have been buried or denied or suppressed or just pushed down, pushed into the unconscious. And this could be a period of really profound self-discovery because Eris tends to expose the hidden motivations operating beneath the surface, right? And she's not shy at all. So you may begin recognizing patterns of self-sabotage, unconscious anger, unresolved grief, hidden resentment, or internal conflicts that have quietly influenced your choices for years. And Eris asked different but difficult questions like, what truth have you been avoiding? Because acknowledging it would require change. She's so not interested in maintaining any sort of comfortable or comforting illusion. She's interested in freedom. So psychologically, this may feel like waking up to aspects of yourself that you didn't fully understand before. Maybe you didn't even realize you had. Some of you may realize that you've been carrying emotional burdens that were in reality never yours to carry. Others of you may discover that old fears have quietly shaped decisions that you've made around relationships and work or money, or maybe even your self-worth. Eris supports the North Node by helping bring unconscious material into awareness so that it just can't control your life anymore from behind the scenes. Now, at the same time, Chiron, newly going into the Taurus energy for the summer, this begins a major healing journey around identity and self-worth and confidence and self-acceptance. And Chiron in the first often brings awareness to wounds connected to feeling seen and valued, and are you lovable or worthy just simply for being yourself? Now, a lot of you, this transit may initiate a process of learning how to define yourself from the inside out rather than through external validation. So you may become more aware of insecurities that you've worked hard to conceal. You may question old self-concepts. You may find yourself asking who you are beneath the roles that you've been playing out for others. Now, Chiron in Taurus specifically asks you to heal your relationship with worth, the idea of worth, anything that has worth or value, right? Not achievement, not productivity, not usefulness, worth. And the lesson is that your value does not increase because you accomplish more, you sacrifice more, you endure more, that it already exists. And it may sound really simple, but for a lot of you, it becomes one of the most profound lessons of your life. And then we come to one of the more psychologically significant aspects. There's Jupiter and Leo opposing Pluto retrograde, Juno retrograde, and part of fortune in Aquarius, again on that fourth house, 10th house axis. As we know, to repeat, Jupiter expands. And again, dynamics having to do with that private life, family dynamics, right? Your emotional foundation. At the same time, Pluto in Aquarius is going to be exposing these hidden dynamics connected to career, reputation, authority, and life direction. Juno retrograde brings long-standing commitments and agreements under review in the retrograde, particularly those connected to family expectations, professional obligations, and just the roles that you've agreed to play part of, right? And then we have the part of fortune that wants fulfillment to come through aligning your public life with your authentic truth rather than any sort of inherited expectation. So this opposition in total shows where your career choices or your long-term choices have been influenced by family conditioning, or where your emotional needs have been sacrificed in pursuit of success. So you might begin recognizing where you've stayed loyal to an old definition of achievement that no longer fits. And Pluto in the 10th is asking you to transform your relationship with power and authority and ambition and visibility. It's asking you, what would success look like if it actually reflected who you are right now? What would that look like? And the deeper lesson of this entire configuration is that true security can't be built solely from the past. It can't be. That South Node in Leo in the fourth begins exposing emotional patterns of family conditioning and inherited narratives that have shaped your sense of safety. While that North Node in the 10th is asking you to just create a future that's more you, more liberated and authentic, and just more in alignment with who you're becoming. And Eris in that 12th is asking you to tell yourself the truth about what has been hidden. Chiron in the first is asking you to heal your relationship with self-worth and identity, right? And Pluto wants you to transform your understanding of success. Well, Jupiter wants to expand your awareness of emotional roots that support or limit your growth. Over the next year and a half, a lot of you may feel as though you're just standing between the life you inherited and the life that you're meant to create. You can feel it a little bit of a crossroads. Some old family patterns may fall away. Some emotional truths can come up to the surface to be looked at. Some career paths may evolve. The goal is not to reject your roots. The goal here is to stop allowing your roots to determine your future. And there's a difference, right? By the end of this cycle, you will discover that true security is not found in staying where you've always been. It's found in becoming who you were always meant to be, right? Even at this point in time. All right, my friends. So I hope that was helpful in some way. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Hi, Gem. So for Gemini risings, this nodal cycle activates the third house, ninth house axis, making the next 18 months a profound journey for you involving communication and perception and beliefs and truth and learning and teaching. And what else is ninth house? Law, legalities, politics. But very important here, it's the stories that you tell yourself about life. And with the South Node newly entering Leo in that third house, which is your home, joined by the Sun, Hygeia, Vulcan, and Jupiter, there's a powerful emphasis on the mind here, right? That third house governs you, but it also governs thinking patterns and communication styles and daily conversations and siblings, extended family, learning, information, and just the way that we interpret our own experiences. And with the South Node going into Leo, there begins this exposure, right? Exposing old mental habits and narratives and assumptions and ways of communicating that may have become so familiar that they operate automatically. So automatically. And for a lot of you, this can feel particularly significant because communication is already a major part of your identity. You're naturally wired to observe and analyze and connect ideas and ask questions and process information. But the South Node in Leo suggests that some of the stories that you've been telling yourself may be very ready for revision, and not because they were wrong, but because they may no longer be complete. You may begin realizing that certain assumptions or opinions or conclusions or narratives have quietly shaped your life for years. Some of these beliefs may have become part of your identity. And the challenge is that when a belief becomes part of your identity, questioning it can feel like questioning yourself. And we also have this conjunction of the Sun, Hygeia, Vulcan, and Jupiter intensifying this entire process. Now, the Sun shines the spotlight on your thinking patterns and your communication style, while Hygeia brings awareness to what's mentally healthy and unhealthy in the third. Vulcan applies pressure, exposing ideas and beliefs that require refinement. We need to work on. And Jupiter is expanding everything it touches, making all of these realizations almost impossible to ignore. So together, these placements show a period of tremendous intellectual and psychological growth. So you may find yourself revisiting old conversations, reassessing long-held assumptions, or just becoming more aware of the narratives running beneath the surface of your daily life. Now, one of the more fascinating things about Hygeia in the third is that she often reveals how much mental habits affect our overall well-being. So you'd start noticing where worry or overthinking or any kind of negative self-talk or any kind of mental overstimulation or those repetitive loops, right? The wheel, the mouse wheel, right? How they've quietly drained your energy, right? So your mind can start sending messages that something needs to be addressed here. It's like you've been rehearsing the same conversation for 6 months, Jam, right? Let's try a different strategy when it comes to that thing. Maybe it's your career, or maybe it's a family situation, maybe it's both, right? But the goal isn't to stop thinking. That would be nearly impossible for you anyway. The goal is to become conscious of how it is that you think. Now, opposite this concentration in Leo in the North Node, entering Aquarius in that ninth house. This is where the growth is really happening here. That ninth house governs wisdom and higher learning and spirituality and philosophy and travel and teaching and wisdom and worldview and the search for meaning. And while that south node is examining familiar thought patterns in that third, the north node is asking you to expand beyond them. So Aquarius in the ninth is encouraging intellectual freedom. It's asking you to become curious about different perspectives that obviously that are different from your own. It'll be challenging you to move beyond simply collecting information and towards developing a broader and different understanding of life. The North Node here asks a very powerful question. It's what if there is more to the story than what we currently know? Now, keep in mind the house that this is in. What if there is more to the story than we currently know about faith, religion, politics, the law, expansion, foreign cultures, foreign lands? It's all ninth house. Father energy. And what if there's more? Now, for a lot of you, this can be both exciting and very uncomfortable at the same time. So Gemini loves information. Aquarius in the ninth wants wisdom. Information gathers facts, right? Wisdom connects them to a larger truth. So over the next year and a half, a lot of you may feel drawn towards study, teaching, travel, spiritual exploration, philosophy, writing, publishing, or entirely new ways of understanding yourselves and the world, right? The growth comes from moving beyond familiar mental territory and becoming more willing to challenge your own conclusions here, right? Becoming very open-minded. Now, the North Node's sextile to Eris retrograde in Aries in the 11th house is a very powerful element of social awakening to this. So Eris in the 11th often disrupts friendships, group dynamics, communities, audiences, and collective affiliation. So psychologically, Eris is asking where or whether you've been shrinking parts of yourself in order to belong. Have you been editing your opinions, avoiding disagreements, staying connected to groups that no longer reflect your values? Eris isn't interested in maintaining artificial harmony. She's interested in authenticity. And that's a tough one these days, right? Especially where everyone is so angry all the time and judgmental, right? So over the next year and a half, you may find yourself reevaluating your friendships, your communities, your networks, your social groups, your long-term goals and gains. Some relationships can deepen because they accommodate greater honesty, and that's awesome. Others may feel increasingly uncomfortable because they depend on you remaining a version of yourself that you've outgrown. And Eris supports the North Node by encouraging you to align with people who support your growth rather than conforming, right? That conformity. Now, at the same time, Chiron newly entering Taurus in the 12th begins a deep healing process involving self-worth, unconscious patterns, hidden fears, emotional wounds that have just been operating right underneath the surface, right underneath your conscious awareness. Now, Chiron in Taurus often highlights wounds around value and security and deserving and self-acceptance. And in that 12th house, these themes frequently originate from experiences that were never fully processed or acknowledged. This is an interesting one because it can reveal hidden insecurities that quietly influence behavior without being obvious. You being more shy, more vulnerable, more insecure about that thing, with that one thing, right? And you didn't even realize how profound it was, but you suddenly getting in touch with that vulnerability. Now, for a lot of you, this can manifest as this subtle self-doubt, unconscious fears of failure, fears of being misunderstood, or deeply rooted beliefs about worthiness that have remained below the surface. Now, Chiron in the 12th house often initiates a process of healing through self-compassion. It asks you to become really aware of the parts of yourself that may have unconsciously rejected or hidden away some truths that you need to look at. So sometimes the greatest healing comes not from fixing yourself, but just old school understanding yourself, right? And then we come to one of the more psychologically significant dynamics having to do with all of this energy here. And that's Jupiter in Leo opposing Pluto retrograde, Juno retrograde, and part of fortune in Aquarius on this third house, ninth house axis. Now, again, we're going to put them all together, but again, Jupiter expands awareness of thoughts, perceptions, communication patterns, and beliefs in this position. Pluto in Aquarius is exposing hidden power dynamics surrounding truth, knowledge, worldview, and meaning. Juno retrograde brings old agreements and commitments under review, especially the agreements that you've made with certain belief systems or ideologies or just the way that you frame the world. And part of fortune suggests that fulfillment comes through intellectual liberation and a willingness to evolve. So this opposition can easily reveal where old narratives have quietly controlled your choices, where you might discover that certain beliefs about yourself, about your relationships and your success or your failure or purpose have been inherited rather than consciously chosen. And Pluto is always asking these difficult questions. And here for you, the question is likely going to be, is this belief or is this way of thinking actually yours? Or is it something that you've been carrying for years without examining it more deeply? And these realizations can be deeply transformative because they help separate truth from conditioning. And Pluto in that ninth house wants intellectual honesty. It wants you to understand not only what you believe, but why you believe it, right? Now, the deeper lesson of all of this configuration is that your thoughts create the framework through which you experience life. And that South Node in Leo in the third house begins exposing habitual narratives, those patterns, those family thought patterns, the familiar thought patterns, communication styles that have just outlived their usefulness. And that North Node in Aquarius in the ninth is encouraging the intellect and expanding the intellect and wisdom and curiosity and just this broader perspective. And Aries in the 11th is asking you to align your social world with your authentic truth, while Chiron in the 12th is asking you to heal unconscious wounds around worth and self-acceptance. And Pluto in the ninth is having you get very real about examining your beliefs that shape your reality. And Jupiter is just expanding your awareness of these stories that you've been telling yourself. And they're all connected. So over the next 18 months, a lot of you are going to feel as though your mind is being rewired from the inside out. Old assumptions can easily fall away. New questions can manifest here and emerge. Friendships can evolve. Belief systems may shift. The goal is not to lose certainty for the sake of uncertainty. The goal here is to develop a relationship with truth that's flexible enough to keep growing. And by the end of this cycle, you're likely going to discover that wisdom isn't about having all the answers. It's about remaining open enough to keep learning, even when the lessons change, even that when the lesson changes everything that you thought you once knew or that you've been thinking or feeling up to this point. Okay, my friends? So I hope that was helpful. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye. For you guys, Cancer Rising, this nodal cycle activates your second and eighth house axis, which means the next year and a half brings a deep psychological lesson around worth, security, money, trust, intimacy, dependence, and emotional power. And with the South Node newly entering Leo in the second house, joined by the Sun, Vulcan, Hygeia, and Jupiter, there's a strong emphasis on personal value, self-worth, resources, possessions, income, stability, and the way you create safety for yourself. That's a lot. Leo in the second wants to feel valued, wants to feel appreciated and respected and secure. It wants to know, do I matter? Am I seen? Am I worth investing in? But with that South Node going into that space, the questions become whether your sense of worth has become too dependent on external validation, financial proof, productivity, or just being recognized for what you bring to the table. And this doesn't mean money, stability, or recognition are unimportant. It's not. Obviously, they absolutely matter. We're spiritual beings, yes, but apparently, as it turns out, the utility companies still prefer payment and not vibes, right? We still have to work. We need money, right? We can't poo-poo that. But that South Node in Leo in the second house simply begins exposing where you may have over-identified with what you have, what you earn, what you give, or how much others appreciate your value. And you might start realizing that you've been looking for security through being needed and admired and financially stable and generous. For some of you, capable, being seen as capable or indispensable. So for a lot of you, this can be a bit of a sore spot because emotional safety is so important. If you don't feel secure, everything can feel shaky, right? And I get it, right? But this cycle is asking you to look honestly at whether your security is rooted in true self-worth or in the hope that someone else will finally recognize your value. Now, the conjunction of the Sun, Hygeia, Vulcan, and Jupiter intensifies this process significantly. The Sun illuminates your relationship with worth and stability. Hygeia brings awareness to what's healthy and unhealthy and your financial habits, your self-esteem, your values, your sense of deserving. Vulcan represents this kind of pressure, this refinement, this forging something stronger, while Jupiter expands everything it touches. So issues around money, confidence, self-respect, and value become almost impossible to ignore. So you can start noticing where you've maybe underpriced yourself, right? If you're in any sort of service business, or where you've overgiven, where you've tolerated less than you deserve, or you've confused being useful with being valued. And Hygeia gently asks you, is this actually nourishing your sense of self-worth, or are you just surviving on emotional crackers and calling it dinner? I mean, these are things to think about. Now, opposite this Leo energy is the North Node newly going into Aquarius in the eighth. And this is where the growth path begins, because that eighth house governs intimacy and shared resources and vulnerability and trust and emotional entanglements and psychological healing and just the deeper bonds that we form with other people. And Aquarius in the eighth asks you to become more objective about intimacy and power. It's asking you to look at what happens when your personal security intersects with another person's needs and money and emotions and wounds or control patterns, right? Really looking at that. There's a North Node there is it's not asking you to become dependent. It's asking you to become conscious. It's asking you to understand that real intimacy requires honesty and boundaries and trust and this willingness to see what's operating beneath the surface, right? So over the next year and a half, a lot of you may be examining shared finances, emotional dependencies, looking at your debt, looking at your some sort of situation with inheritance or psychological fears, intimate relationships, patterns around trust, right? And you could start becoming more aware of where you hold on tightly because you fear losing something. You fear loss. You can recognize where you resist vulnerability because being self-sufficient feels safer. Or you may see where you have not allowed emotional or financial entanglements to determine your sense of security and where you have. So that North Node in Aquarius in the eighth is asking you to develop a healthy relationship with shared power. It's teaching you that trust doesn't mean losing yourself, and independence doesn't mean not needing anyone, right? That North Node sextile to Eris retrograde in Aries in the 10th house adds a very powerful layer around career, visibility, authority, reputation, public identity. Eris in the 10th exposes where you've been playing a role in the world that just no longer feels authentic. She may bring disruption around professional expectations, public image, leadership, or the pressure to succeed in a way that others approve of. Eris in Aries is not here to be polite about your potential, right? She's really asking, just what are you doing? What are you making of yourself? Why are you making yourself smaller in life, right? Especially in a life that's supposed to belong to you. Why are you making yourself smaller? Man, this could bring a growing unwillingness to tolerate professional dynamics where you feel undervalued, overlooked, controlled, or expected to perform strength without proper recognition. So psychologically, Eris in that space may wake up ambition and frustration and courage and this very strong desire to be seen on your own terms. So you may begin questioning whether your public role reflects your real values or whether it's been shaped by survival, approval, or even obligation. And this supports the North Node because as you become more honest about your public life, you also become a lot more honest about the emotional and financial entanglements underneath it. And Eris here helps you stop pretending that everything is okie dokie, right? Just because you're handling it well. Handling something well doesn't automatically mean that it's healthy, right? And Chiron, newly going into the Taurian energy in the 11th house, also supports this nodal story by beginning a healing process around belonging and friendship and community and support and future dreams, right? And this placement speaks to wounds around worth and value and stability and deserving. And in the 11th, it could happen through 11th house energies, friendships, groups, audiences, social circles, your long-term goals and gains. It could be something healing about that. But you can start noticing where you have not felt fully valued by friends or communities, right? Where you could start to question whether certain groups truly support you or they simply just want to benefit from your loyalty or from your care, right? Because a lot of you can be deeply nurturing just by default, right? And Chiron here asks whether the people around you also nurture your dreams, your confidence, and your sense of belonging. And this isn't about keeping score. It's just about recognizing is there reciprocity. And this placement can reveal old wounds around exclusion or comparison, social insecurity, or feeling like you have to earn your place. Chiron and Taurus in the 11th is asking you to heal the belief that you must prove your value in order to belong. It reminds you that your genuine community doesn't require you to overgive or overextend or become everybody's emotional support animal, right? You are allowed to belong without constantly making yourself useful. And then we have Jupiter and Leo opposing Pluto retrograde, Juno retrograde in the part of fortune in Aquarius. We talk about this because all together on this second house, eighth house axis, very important psychological occurrence that's happening right now in your chart. So again, Jupiter expands awareness of self-worth and money and values of personal security in that space. Pluto in Aquarius is exposing these hidden power dynamics within intimacy, shared resources, emotional bonds, any of those financial entanglements. Juno retrograde brings commitments and agreements under review, especially those involving trust, loyalty, any kind of shared responsibility, debt, marriage, any kind of deep emotional contract. And the part of fortune here is really looking at the ability to fulfill something that you feel you need, right? That the fulfillment comes through transforming your relationship with trust and vulnerability and shared power. Treating trust almost like a separate entity and saying, okay, I need to heal you. I need to understand this better and heal it. Now, this opposition can reveal where you've been trying to feel secure by controlling what you can control while avoiding the deeper emotional truths that require vulnerability. So, like a bit of a balancing act here where you may begin recognizing where money and loyalty and intimacy and emotional dependency have become all mangled together or tangled together. So you might see where you've given too much or expected too little or allowed another person's instability to affect your sense of worth. And Pluto in the eighth houses, we're not just balancing the checkbook here, baby. We're looking at the emotional contract underneath it. And that right there is where the real transformation begins. And that deeper lesson of this configuration is that your worth can't depend on being needed or being chosen or being paid or being praised or validated by other people. That South Node in Leo in the second begins exposing where you've tied your value to external proof. And the North Node in Aquarius in the eighth is asking you to develop a more conscious, honest, and liberated relationship with intimacy, trust, and shared resources. Eris in the 10th asks you to step into a more authentic public identity Chiron in the 11th is asking you to heal wounds around belonging and support. And Pluto in the 8th is asking you to examine hidden power dynamics, while that Jupiter in the 2nd is expanding the awareness of your own worth. So, bringing it all together over the next year and a half, a lot of you are going to feel as though you're renegotiating your relationship with security from the inside out. Money matters may become more visible. Relationship agreements will likely require a lot more honesty. You can have shifting dynamics within friendships. Career dynamics might reveal where you're ready to claim more authority. And that could be as simple as just moving away from something. It doesn't necessarily mean, but it can mean that. The goal isn't to detach from what matters to you here, right? The goal is to stop confusing security with control. Because by the end of this cycle, you may understand that true worth is not something other people give you when they finally recognize your value. It's something that you reclaim when you stop negotiating against yourself, right? And that is what I have for you, my friends. I hope this was helpful in some way. You guys take care. Bye-bye.